Hi everyone, happy World Book Day. My name is Jen Campbell. I'm an author and a book reviewer, and today Changing Faces has asked me to sit down and talk to you about some of my favourite books that feature disabled and deaf characters and characters who have visual differences and disfigurements. I have a rare form of ectodermal dysplasia, which means that I have ectrodactyly, missing fingers and alopecia, hair loss, as well as some other health medical things. I run a YouTube channel where I talk about books, but I also talk about the representation of disfigurement and disability in the media. So if you would like to learn more about those things, you can head over to the link, which will be in the description box down below. There are over 600 videos there. Apparently I talk a lot, but today I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet. As I said, I'm here to give you book recommendations. I have cherry picked some of my favourites. I'm also going to quickly mention a few of my own books too. I have book recommendations for all age groups. So let's begin. Let's start with picture books. My first recommendation is Can Bears Ski by Raymond Antrobus, illustrated by Polly Dunbar. This is Ray's first picture book. He's also a poet, and I have another of his books to recommend later. This is about Little Bear, who thinks that he is mishearing words around him. His father keeps asking him, "Can bears ski?" But when he stops and thinks about it, he thinks, is that really what he's asking me? And it's about him getting fitted with hearing aids and then experiencing sounds in a different way and realizing that even though his father was not asking him, "Can bears ski?" it's quite a fun question to think about anyway. Another recommendation is a picture book that's coming out this spring called What Happened to You by James Catchpole, illustrated by Karen George. This is about a young boy called Joe who loves going to the playground. He loves pretending that he's a pirate and that there are sharks lurking underneath the slide. But what frustrates Joe is that whenever he goes to the playground, other children and indeed adults will come up to him and immediately ask, "What happened to you?" because Joe happens to have one leg. Joe wants to play and make friends. He doesn't always want to answer that question. And this is a book about how it's not important to have the answer to that question. And it will open up discussions with non-disabled adults, with their non-disabled children, about boundaries and what is okay to ask and when, and just to think about those particular things and how it wouldn't be nice to be asked the same question as the first thing you hear when you meet someone new again and again. And it will also empower disabled children to realize that they don't have to satisfy strangers' curiosities all the time if they don't feel like it. It's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. Then, if I may, I'm going to recommend one of my picture books, which is called Franklin's Flying Bookshop. This is illustrated by Katie Harnett, and it is about a dragon called Franklin who loves reading stories, and he wants to share his love of books with everybody that he meets. The only problem is that the local village are scared of Franklin because he's a dragon. He then meets a young girl called Luna who loves books and isn't scared of dragons because she's read all about them. And together they hatch a plan to take their love of books in the form of a bookshop on Franklin's back to the local villagers. This book is not about visual difference or disability, but it is about not judging people based on the way that they look, about how we can share empathy through reading and books and help us understand one another. And for that reason, I wanted to include it here. Let's move on to middle grade, which is ages 8 to 12. An author that I wanted to give a particular shout out to is Burnell, who I love. She used to be a children's TV presenter. Now she is an author, and she has written many different novels with characters who have visual differences. She's also written this non-fiction book here, which is called I Am Not a Label, 34 Disabled Artists, Thinkers, Athletes and Activists from Past and Present. But the particular book of hers that I wanted to highlight today is this novel here, which is called The Ice Bear Miracle. This is a novel set in the Arctic North about Marv Jackson, who is also known as Marvel, because when he was 5 years old, he heard a baby's cry and went out onto the ice to investigate, and he was attacked by a bear. So he has a facial disfigurement, he has a scar on his face, and the storyline is split between him and his relationship with this bear who keeps on coming back to visit him, and also Tuesday, who is a girl who dances with a bear in a circus and is touring. It's a fantastic, magical book. Another middle grade book that I would recommend is Wonderstruck by Brian Selznick. Now I know This book is pretty huge. It's part novel and part graphic novel. So some of it looks like this, and then some of it is written out in text. This is about two characters called Ben and Rose, who actually live 50 years apart. Their stories are happening across time. Ben is experiencing hear loss after an accident. Rose was born deaf, and it's about their experiences of those things and how they're trying to reach each other through time. Again, it is truly magical. I loved it very much. Wonderstruck, as I said, had elements of graphic novels in it, so let's move on to other graphic novels. Firstly, this one is actually a graphic memoir because it is about her life. This is A Puff of Smoke by Sarah Lippett, and this is about her experiencing a mysterious illness when she was at school and how it lasted years, and she had lots of investigative procedures to try and work out what was going on with her body, but the doctors didn't really have answers for it. And as it says on the back, A Puff of Smoke is a moving, often very funny graphic memoir about what it is like to grow up with an illness that no one can diagnose. I read this last year. I'll just open it so that you can see what the style of art inside is like. And I love this so much, and I wish I had read it when I was younger. It really fantastically depicts the duality, what it's like to be a child who's in hospital a lot of the time, but then is in school as well and trying to marry those parts of your life together, and how that can be quite difficult. As the blurb says, it's also extremely funny as well. I thought it was great. And a graphic novel that I would recommend, I read this as a 34-year-old woman and absolutely loved it, so let me recommend this for everybody. This is The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill. This is the most charming, heartwarming book I think I've possibly ever read. If any book was like a cup of tea and a warm hug, it's this one right here. This is about a society who look after dragons who are growing tea out of their heads, and you can pluck that tea and brew it, and it has magical qualities. It's got such a diverse cast of characters, one of whom is a wheelchair user, and as I said, it is just something that will make your heart warm and fuzzy, and I can't recommend it enough. Let me show you one of the plates inside so that you can see how beautiful the artwork is as well. Let's move on to books for grown-ups. I have two non-fiction books here that I would particularly recommend, but as I said, I'm recommending just a few books here, and if you would like more book recommendations on disability, disfigurement and deafness and all of that, you can head over to my YouTube channel. My first recommendation is Disability Visibility, edited by Alice Wong. This is a collection of many different items. This is a collection of many different essays by many different writers who are disabled or have visual differences and disfigurements, and are speaking about their personal experience of those things. Anthologies are such a great way to discover writers whose work you might want to read in more depth, and some of these authors have their own complete books too, so you can go off and read those afterwards if you would like to. I would also recommend Sitting Pretty by Rebekah Taussig, the view from my ordinary, resilient, disabled body. In this, Rebekah is talking about teaching disability studies as a disabled person and what that is like. She has a series of essays in this that look at the social model of disability and how so many people focus on the medical and how that's not very helpful. It is such a fantastic book. It was one of my favourite books of 2020. As for fiction, I have a slightly different recommendation here. This is The Tidal Zone by Sarah Moss. This is about a stay-at-home dad called Adam and his teenage daughter Miriam. Miriam collapses at school one day and her heart stops, but she recovers and she's sent home. But the doctors don't know why this happened to her, so they say it may happen again because we're not sure what happened. So it is about how the dynamics of the family are changing, how everyone's adapting, trying to get on with their everyday life, but there is this new element to their existence. Will this happen again? How do we deal with that uncertainty, and how do we move forward? And I thought it was a really interesting dissection of family life, illness, fear and recovery. I also wanted to recommend my short story collection, The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night, which is suitable for grown-ups but can be read by teenagers too. This is a collection of 12 haunting tales, many of which contain magical realism. Some of them are inspired by fairy tales. They're not fairy tale retellings, but some of the characters hark back to old stories as a means to justify the sometimes questionable things that they are doing. It is dark and twisted. In one of the stories, I use magical realism to discuss bodily difference. It's set in a summer camp for teenagers who are growing plants out of their bodies. One of the more realist short stories, the end one, is called Bright White Hearts, and the narrator is a woman who has ectrodactyly, like I do, who works in an aquarium and is obsessed with the different kinds of fish that live there. Another of the stories is narrated by a young boy who is a wheelchair user, and he lives in a world where people accidentally hiccup ghosts into existence. Tiny little ghosts that float around the world in all different colours. Let's talk about poetry. Raymond Antrobus, who I mentioned at the beginning of this video, has several poetry collections. This one is his debut full-length collection called The Perseverance. It is about deafness, family, identity, race. It is warm and loving, and I can't recommend it enough. I would also recommend Hannah Hodgson. She again has a few different pamphlets out. This one is called Dear Body. Hannah draws from her own experience of disability and illness to ask questions about the relationship between personal identity and our place in the world. The first poem is one of my favourites, which is called Invisible, and it begins, "Watch Rapunzel as she can't get to the top of the tower because there is no lift." Or Cinderella, who can't get to the ball because there are no accessible pumpkins available. I would also recommend this anthology. Like with Disability Visibility, poetry anthologies are a great way to discover new writers that you may not have heard of before. This is Deaf and Disabled Poets Write Back, which is edited by Andrea Aland, Karani Barocca and Daniel Sluman. And finally, if I may, I will recommend my poetry collection, The Girl Aquarium. This is all about bodily difference and girlhood, about disfigurement and the history of the freak show. It's tied up in folklore and myths about the sea as well. Those are all of the books that I wanted to recommend to you today. As I said, I have many more over on my YouTube channel. If you happen to be curious, it will be linked in the description box down below. Also, go and check out the work that Changing Faces do if you are not already familiar with them. And I hope that you all have a brilliant World Book Day. Thanks.